Hi everyone, it's Susie DeJong and this is Masterpiece in Progress. And the reason that I started this interview series was I felt that there was a real lack of information out there for women my age on a lot of subjects that are thought of as, embarrassing or taboo. And I think we really need to have these discussions. So that is why I am talking to my particular guest today. And today I'm really excited to have all the way from San Francisco, Rachel Hart, who has many talents, not just as a life coach, but is also the author of Why Can't I Drink Like Everyone Else? A step-by-step guide to understanding why you drink and how to take a break. Rachel also has a weekly podcast where she shares different tools with her listeners that she uses to support her own clients. So I highly recommend you go on there, and I'll put the link in this video as well so you can go and explore, because it's a really great site. I literally stumbled across a reference on Rachel in a blog I was reading on a psychology site, and I just went, wow. I instantly clicked on her website and had a scour through it, and I thought, this lady has a lot that she can offer my female clients and followers. Rachel works with her clients, the majority of who are female, supporting them in how to reduce their reliance on alcohol as a numbing or coping or confidence boosting agent. And she gives them strategies and tools to assist them to reduce or eliminate alcohol from their lives. And naturally with this comes the freedom from beating themselves up, the guilt and shame that can go hand in hand with this particular challenge. So welcome, Rachel, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that you want to talk about this issue and bring it to all of your followers.
Absolutely. On your website, which I really have to commend you, it's a great website, you had a quote which particularly struck me, and I'll just read it out. It turns out that your brain isn't the problem, it's the answer. If you want to change your drinking, you first have to radically change your thinking. And the main reason, Rachel, why your method resonated with me is that I practice a therapy as part of my coaching practice called Rapid Transformational Therapy, which is created by a leading UK psychotherapist, Marissa Peer. And it's really based on a similar premise, which is our lives are shaped by the pictures that we have in our mind and the words that we say to ourselves, so our self-talk and our thoughts. And so change the pictures and change the words and you can change your life. So I just found that there was a symmetry between what I'm helping my clients with and you as well. So I read another quote on your website, which was, pouring a drink was my go-to solution to relax and quiet the nagging critic in my head. And I'd love you to share with us, with your permission, just a little bit about your own background and how that morphed into the wonderful work that you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I think that so many women can relate to the idea that at some point in their life, all of a sudden they started to have all this negative chatter. Right? All this chatter about how they weren't measuring up, they didn't fit in, something about them was wrong, something about them wasn't right. And, I struggled with that from a pretty young age, and I didn't know what to do with it. Nobody told me about it. Nobody addressed this with me. Certainly we get messages about, how we should think highly of ourselves, but, how do we do that? How do we actually think about ourselves in a positive way? So it was something that was always with me and always by my side. I didn't really know what to do about except try to become a perfect version of myself, or the perfect version of what I thought or who I thought I should be, which of course is not pretty sustainable and leads you kind of in this hamster wheel, right? Chasing after something that you're never going to achieve. So I set foot on my first day of college with all those negative voices right there. And college was when I really discovered alcohol. I discovered it at my very first college party. And I remember being there. I remember feeling so awkward and so insecure and looking at all these other women and thinking how I didn't measure up and I didn't know how to hold my body. Everything felt foreign. Everything felt so uncomfortable. And I just wanted to get out of there. And somebody handed me a drink. And, after I had that drink, I started to notice like, hey, this isn't so bad. Some of that anxiety started to lessen. I noticed that I started to feel a little bit more ease. And a lot of people can relate to this because, of course, alcohol is known as a social lubricant. Now, the problem for me was that I got into the habit of making sure that I had a drink in my hand to deal with my social anxiety, to deal with my insecurity and my awkwardness and these feelings of not measuring up. And the problem was the more that I turned to a drink to solve those problems for me, I wasn't learning how to solve them for myself. And so that was really what my college experience was like. I really put my nose to the grindstone during the week, but on the weekends, I wanted to have a good time. And the only way I knew how to do that was to make sure that I was drinking. And I didn't always like the results that I was getting. And that really stayed with me well into my 20s, well after graduating from college. And so I would flip-flop back and forth between drinking and not drinking and feeling like, I don't like the results that I'm getting all the time. I don't like waking up feeling hungover. I don't like waking up in the morning and thinking, gosh, did I really do that last night? Did I really say that? But I also felt like, yeah, but I don't know how to be me. I don't know how to socialize. I don't know how to be comfortable and confident in these situations. And so, I would go back and forth between feeling as if when I was taking a break from drinking or not drinking, that, yeah, I was healthy. I was physically very healthy and I had nothing to regret in the morning. But I also felt that I could see myself isolating. I could see myself hiding. And that wasn't sustainable either. And it felt like I was in this tug of war between either drink so I could feel like myself socially and not like the results that I was always getting, or not drink, feel really healthy, but feel like I was always missing out, always kind of miserable, deprived. And I just felt so torn between those two places.
Yeah. It's a real monkey on your back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the light bulb moment for you when you realised that there was a solution that you could share to help support others going through the same sort of process?
Well, I felt like I struggled with my drinking for so long, and I was constantly trying to figure it out. I was constantly trying to understand why it was a problem for me. I mean, the reason why I named my book, Why Can't I Drink Like Everyone Else, is because that was really a question that I struggled with, and I thought it was really true. And I didn't like the options out there. What the options out there that were kind of mainstream and well-known, I didn't relate to the idea of being powerless. I didn't relate to the idea of, having to wear a label for the rest of my life. And so I was determined to find a solution that would work for me. And I'll tell you that my two light bulb moments, one was I remember being given an exercise to do that was a cost-benefit analysis, not only of my drinking, but also of taking a break. And so it was to look at the pros and cons of each. And I think for so many of us, when we want to change a habit, what we do is we just focus on all the cons. We focus on all the negatives. And we think, if I can just remind myself all these negative results that I'm getting, then I'll change. But what that exercise helped me do was see that I was getting benefits from drinking. Right? There were a lot of positives. And if I didn't figure out new ways to give myself those same benefits, I would always be missing out. And that really switched something for me, to see it as both pros and cons. And then not just drinking, but also what my brain thought it would be like not to drink. I saw pros and cons there as well. And if I wasn't able to shift those cons, which to me was being isolated, feeling like I was always going to miss out, feeling like I was deprived, like I didn't fit in. If I couldn't shift that, then I would be back in the same spot where I might be not drinking, but feeling like I was left out, feeling like I didn't fit in, feeling like I was healthy, but not happy with the choice. So that was the first thing that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And I'll tell you, the second one was when I first encountered this idea that our thoughts create our feelings and our feelings drive our actions. So I talk about this a lot on my podcast, the think, feel, act cycle. It just made so much sense to me. All of a sudden, I had a framework to understand that picking up a drink, making the decision to drink, didn't just come out of the ether. Right? It wasn't this mysterious thing. It was driven by how I was feeling at the moment. And that was driven by what I was thinking. And it just made so much sense. It was so logical. And I felt like it really helped to clear up a lot of the shame that I had had around it. And knowing that I had felt all this shame, knowing how other women do as well, I just thought, this makes so much sense. This is such a logical way to look at it. Why aren't we talking about it this way? Why don't more people know about these ideas? And those were really the two moments where I thought, you know what, this has been so amazing for me. I just really want to bring it to a wider audience.
Yeah. I applaud you for that, because it is making yourself very vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But when you have the gift of something that you can share to help others, you have to put, that behind and think of, how I can help others. Because, I see a lot of people struggling with it. That's one of the questions I was going to ask you. For me, it's the not fitting in. I can remember when I was a teenager feeling like you say, going to a party, and I was always on the outside looking in. Even now in my life, sometimes I'm like that. So that was like having, back in the days where we smoked, having a cigarette in your hand or having a drink in your hand. It just made you feel like the whole, you just blended in. But there's also the using it to numb. So what are the main reasons you see that women use this as a crutch, apart from those things?
Yeah, so numbing is one of the main reasons. And so what that means is, here's the thing, the human brain is so smart, right? And I always say that one of the big problems is we have this incredibly intelligent brain, and nobody gives us an instruction manual. Nobody shows us how to use it, right? We don't get that class in school. And so what ends up happening, a lot of people discover that they can find things in their external environment to change or lessen a negative emotion. And I call that numbing. Right? It's this idea, and it's not just exclusive to drinking. It's this idea that we can use things external to us to try to dampen or turn down the volume on how we feel. And most of us learn how to do this unconsciously. We have no idea this is what we're doing. Maybe we saw it modeled, maybe we just figured it out, but we can do this with a drink, right? The idea that I'm feeling so awkward, or I'm feeling so insecure, and then, oh wait, I seem to feel a little less. Right? Once I start drinking. But I watch people do this with food. I did this with food for a long time, right? If you put enough food in your body, you're literally pulling energy away from your nervous system where you're feeling that emotion to your digestive system. You're literally dulling the emotion. So it's working in a different way, but it has the same effect. Some people do this with work, right? Some people keep themselves so busy that they don't have time to feel. And that's what numbing is. And I see for a lot of people that stress, dealing with stress and anxiety, especially at the end of the day, right? Pouring a glass of wine is that kind of end of the day reward. And if you're coming home every day feeling stressed, every day feeling like, oh, can't believe I made it through that day, right? You unconsciously teach yourself, oh, this is how I feel better. I think socially, you'll see insecurity, lack of confidence, awkwardness, right? Feeling like you don't fit in. Those are also negative emotions that people will try to numb or cover up. But then, there's many others. The more that I work with people, the more that I discover there's so many different ways that people will use a drink to numb. And so it might be loneliness, it might be boredom, it might be just, you know, the anxiety they feel about not being able to sleep at night. But we teach our brain unconsciously to do it, right? Because that brain is really smart. It's trying to figure out a way to help you. The problem is it's not sustainable, and people start getting negative results, right? And then they don't know what to do, and they feel like, well, if I'm gonna cut back on the drinking, but then what am I gonna do? I'm gonna walk into the party and feel so insecure. I'm gonna come home at the end of the day, I'm gonna be so stressed out, right? And so it feels like, you know, it's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah. Can you give us a brief overview of the method you use with your clients to help them change their drinking patterns?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I think is incredibly important is that I am working with people to help change their drinking, but in many ways, the focus is not solely on alcohol. And I think that that's a very big change, right? A lot of people, when they think, oh, I need to change my drinking, I'm just going to count drinks, right? Or I'm just going to say no. Right? And the focus is going to be, how many days can I say no for? What I want to do is look at the root cause. And so that really is understanding, how are you feeling, right? What is the feeling that is motivating the action of picking up a drink? And what are the thoughts connected to drinking? So we'll look a lot at what kind of stories people have around what it means if they drink or don't drink, right? We are socialized to have all of these stories about what it means, about who we are as a person, to either consume or not to consume alcohol. And those stories for many people are a very big stumbling block. Yeah, I also really try to use a lot of mindfulness techniques. So we're not given skills about how to manage our urges. Nobody tells us, right, how to handle a negative emotion, or even how to pay attention to our thinking. Right? And so really teaching people how to use mindfulness and just being present of what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're doing, that in and of itself can be really transformative for people. And so sometimes it will look like people will say, I want to take a break. I'm kind of sick of where I am right now. I just want to spend some time focusing on me and understanding why I feel kind of pulled to drink more than I want. And other times people may not be ready for that, right? They might just say, look, that scares me, but I do want to start somewhere. And so then what we'll do is really start with some mindfulness techniques around the decision and the choice to drink.
And with drinking, cutting back drinking, or any other thing like deciding to go on I don't like the word diet, but an eating program or something, when you feel like you're having to do without, is when you start getting obsessive about it. I mean, I can remember giving up smoking, 20 years ago or something, and all I could think about was smoking. And I'm sure it's the same way with drinking too. So willpower alone is obviously just a no-win situation.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about, willpower a lot, because that is what most people think is going to be the solution, right? They'll come to me and they'll just say, I just need to be stronger, right? I just need to have more willpower. Show me how to have more willpower. And what I want people to know is that, willpower can be useful, but it's not very sustainable, because you're not actually changing the underlying think, feel, act cycle. You're not changing the thoughts that are having you pick up the drink, right? You're not changing the thoughts that are making you feel deprived. You're just pushing against them. You're just resisting. And you do that long enough, and a lot of people get worn out by it, because they're still feeling the deprivation, right? They're just resisting and resisting and resisting and feeling deprived at the same time. And that doesn't feel good or sustainable. And so what I want people to learn is that the reason they feel deprived is not because they're not drinking or they're not eating or they're not smoking. The reason they're feeling deprived is because of all of the thoughts that they have about it, right? All of their thinking about, oh, so unfair, why me, how come I can't, right? You have to really pay attention to that chatter in your brain to understand, what is creating that deprivation and restriction, so that you can start to shift it and change it. And
I think with what you've been saying, what I read on your site, that a lot of it does go back to feeling not good enough in some way. So having to discover where that feeling, that beliefs come from, and do some really deep inner work.
Yeah, one thing that I always remind my clients is that it is no surprise that so many of us share this same belief, right? That somehow we're not good enough, that somehow we don't measure up. And the truth is that we are getting messages all the time in our culture, right? We're getting messages all the time about how we can be thinner, right? How we can make more money, how we can have a better house, how we can have a nicer car, nicer clothing, right? All these messages about how we can fix ourselves and then we'll be happy. And I think that understanding that that is a message that advertisers use to sell us something, right? It's important to see that. It's important to understand, feeling like you don't measure up, feeling like you're not good enough. There's a good reason for that. And the reason is because you're getting saturated with these messages all the time from all these different places. When you pick up a magazine, when you're scrolling through Facebook and looking at the ads, when you're watching a movie even. And so really understanding that those messages are going to affect how you feel about yourself.
Absolutely. I think that is a huge one. So I have to ask this question. Why do some people have an off switch when it comes to drinking and others don't? And I'm going to put my hand up, and I'm not embarrassed about this. I'm one of those that don't have an off switch. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, it was something that I wrestled with for a very long time myself, right? Feeling like, why don't I have an off switch? And it seems like my friends do. And, what I will tell you is I think it's actually a bit of a misconception, this idea that some people have an off switch and some people don't. What I like people to really understand it is that we're not given tools on how to manage our urges, right? Nobody explains what to do when you feel desire. And no one also explains that when you act on your desire and you give your brain that reward, you're going to perpetuate it. So the way that I see it is that it's actually something that is much more about learning how to be with desire and let it go unanswered, which is just a skill that, we're not taught how to do. And so some people may be better able at it. And maybe it was because it was modeled for them at home, right? Maybe they saw a parent that was pretty good at not necessarily always fulfilling a desire, right? Maybe, I think this is also another important thing. I do believe that, genetic and environmental factors can play a role in people's usage of alcohol. But I always say that, your genetics and your environment are not your destiny, right? Being predisposed for something is not the same as predetermined, right? You still have free will. You still can learn how to make choices. And I think a lot of that is kind of denied in the conversation, the kind of larger cultural conversation that we have around anything that feels kind of compulsive. And, the other thing that I point out to people is that, more and more, we're living in a world where there is so much reward all around us all the time, right? I talk about how, it's not just that many drinks are getting stronger, right? But the serving sizes are getting bigger, just like the same thing with food, right? Yeah. Serving sizes of food are getting larger. And then you think about, sitting down in front of Netflix. We have to expend very little energy to watch a movie. We used to have to go to a video store, right? You used to have to get up off the couch, go to a store, rent the movie. Now you just have one after another after another. And so understanding that people's brains respond differently in that environment. But even if you respond differently, it doesn't mean that you can't learn a different way. And I often think about, the way that I drank was very similar to the way that I ate growing up, right? I ate very quickly. There was no mindfulness around it, right? I was trying to get as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And, I was doing this with certain kinds of foods. I wasn't doing it with my Brussels sprouts, right? I was doing it with soda. I was doing it with ice cream. I was doing it with food that gave my brain a big reward. Now, transfer that to when I started drinking, right? So I already had that habit of consuming things very quickly. And then of course, the things that I started drinking in college, you can imagine, were very sweet, right? So I always say, like, I drink orange juice and wine at the same rate, right? It was just very quickly, very fast, like, let's have another glass.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very similar. I really believe that. So is there a certain type of personality that is more susceptible, like sensitive people? Obviously people, well, we've discussed that, I guess, already, people that feel like they don't belong. They're different in somehow. Mm-hmm. And I guess in your instance, when you're at college and you're trying to fit in and, you know, it's the cultures of drinking that would have a big part to play. But also I think sensitive people who, don't feel like they don't fit in. I think that's a really big one.
So I always caution people around labeling something as a specific type of personality. And the reason why I do is because when people often say, you know, I just have an addictive personality, right? That's just my personality. And when we talk about it as our personality, it feels like this very fixed thing. Like, well, that's just my personality. How do I change my personality? And so, you know, I always want people to think about it as, I do believe that there are some people who are more susceptible. Certainly, if you are someone who maybe feels emotions more intensely. And on top of that, if you are someone who has never been shown, no one's ever modeled you good ways, good coping mechanisms for how to deal with emotions, you may be more likely to go into your environment and look for things unconsciously and unknowingly that will help dampen how you're feeling. Right? But I think it's important, you know, I always talk about this as skills that we're learning, right? Rather than kind of personality features, because I think most people see personality features as very fixed, right? Like, oh, I'm just, you know, I'm outgoing. That's how I've always been. That's how I'll always be. And, you know, seeing it more as how your brain has learned to do something, you know, not only does it show you that it's not fixed, but also that you can learn how to do something differently.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness, right?
So I don't know if you know much about the reputation of Australians, but we have quite a reputation as being big drinkers, especially at social events. I mean, it's, any excuse for a drink. A lot of people simply can't fathom in Australia that you would go to a social event and not drink. And you know, you can be made to feel really self-conscious and people will push. And I know a lot of it is because it's affecting how they think their drinking is too. So you're mirroring something back to them about themselves. But what's the best way to approach that? What do you suggest for your clients? Do you just say, I'm having a break, or do you stay away from the social events? Do you tell a little white lie like you're on medication? What's a good way?
Yeah, so I really encourage people to not isolate and to not tell white lies. And let me tell you, I was like the queen of white lies, right? It was like, oh, I'm not feeling well. I have an early meeting tomorrow. I'm on antibiotics. I drank a lot last night, right? I mean, the thing that I think when you go down that road of telling little white lies is that you're reinforcing this idea that not drinking and your reason behind not drinking is something that you need to hide. Right? And something that you should have a little shame about. So now listen, if you are just starting out taking a break, I'm not suggesting that the very first thing that you do is walk into a bar, right? And like go hang out with your friends there. But I do think that one of the biggest pitfalls is that people will take a break from drinking and they'll just isolate. because it's so much easier to stay home. It's so much easier to be by themselves and not have to answer people's questions. Again, the problem is it's not sustainable. Like, we are humans. Humans are meant to be, we are creatures of connection. We are meant to be social. And so nobody wants that. Nobody wants to feel like I can't go to my friend's birthday party or to a wedding or just a happy hour. And so I really do encourage people to decide to challenge themselves. You know, I also remind people that there are 3 types of people in this world when it comes to caring about your drinking. There are people who are not going to notice, legitimately. They're too caught up in their own head. There are people who are going to think it is the worst idea that they have ever heard, and why would anyone choose not to drink? You must be crazy, or you must have a problem, but they would never do it. And there are people who will say, you know what? I've been thinking about doing this. Tell me more. What is it like? How is it here that you're drinking a club soda? Are you having a good time? And I always remind people that your focus is, of course, where you think it means something about you. So if I walk into an event, right, and I'm not drinking, and I think, yeah, it means I have a problem. It means something's wrong with me. It means that I'm different from everybody else. Then, of course, the people that I encounter who agree with that, right, who think like, why would you do this, right? I'm going to be very, very sensitive to those kind of reactions. And so I make sure that people are really, really clear with themselves first. What are you making not having a drink in your hand mean about you? You've got to understand that first before you can understand how you react to other people's responses. And you're right, not drinking is often a mirror for other people, right? Because if we're all doing the same thing, if everybody has a beer in their hand, then there's no difference. There's nothing for anyone to kind of look at a contrast. But if 5 people have a beer in their hand and I don't, all of a sudden it's like, oh, how come she's not drinking? Should I be drinking? Maybe I shouldn't be drinking, right? Yeah. And so your actions can often serve as a mirror. And so I really remind people of that as well. If someone's having a really strong reaction about you not drinking, it says so much more about them and their thoughts and what drinking means for them than it really does about you. But it's hard to learn that at first, right? I remember myself taking it very personally at first and feeling like, oh, I just want to hide. But of course, it's not realistic. And I think that when you isolate and when you tell little white lies, it actually makes long-term change less sustainable for you.
Oh, I think that is wonderful. And it's refreshing. I mean, who wants to pretend?
Yeah.
Because that's just hard work and there's nothing to be ashamed about. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you, because I know that there is a lot of shame attached to this, and I know a lot of women beat themselves up. I mean, I've done it. And it's just this no-win situation, because then you just feel worse. And you said some points in your first podcast that I'll wrap up after this, but I thought this was so important. It really struck home with me. You went over 4 different points, and I encourage anyone who, you know, this resonates with to go on and especially listen to that first podcast, because that was really, really, yeah, it changed my mind on a lot of ways that I've been thinking. The first one was alcohol is morally neutral. It's not good or bad. So can you just speak a little bit on that, because that was a huge one for me.
Yeah, that kind of blew my mind too, right? This idea that, you know, alcohol is just, it's alcohol, right? Like it's not until we start attaching our thinking to it that we make it good or bad. And what I see a lot, especially when people are trying to change a habit, and it's not just drinking, that they start to kind of demonize, right? Like, oh, like this is terrible. I don't want it. Now, the problem with that, when we attach a label to something being good or bad, is that we fall into these traps of like, well, I've already been a little bad, so I might as well be really bad, right? Yeah. Or like, I've been so good all week. Like, don't I deserve to be a little bad, right? When we start attaching those labels, we eventually take those labels on for ourselves. right? And I think that it's so important, you know, drinking is not a vice and abstaining is not a virtue. And really understanding that alcohol is neutral. It has been with humans for thousands of years, right? The fermentation process was around before humans even learned how to harness it. And it's going to continue to be with us. And if you can understand that alcohol is neutral, then you can start to look at how your thoughts are making it either good or bad, or a vice or a virtue.
Because if you've got that opinion, that it's good or bad, then you're good or bad.
Of course. And, you know, and this is a huge thing. I mean, I really think that when you want to change a habit like this, if you are mired in shame, if you are beating yourself up, here's the thing. We learn to drink unconsciously as a way to mitigate how we feel. If you're feeling a lot of negative emotions about the habit, a lot of negative emotions about yourself, guess what? You might go pour yourself a drink.
So the other point you made is this is not a black and white or either or struggle.
Yeah, this is a really big one, right? We talk about drinking as if only two types of drinkers exist in the world. You have a normal drinker and you have an alcoholic, right? And there's nothing in between. But the fact of the matter is that the degrees of struggle really vary. There is a spectrum between unhealthy behaviors and physical addiction, right? And when we talk about it in this black or white way, what happens is that so many people who don't see themselves on either end of the spectrum are kind of like, well, where do I fit in, right? And it leaves them feeling like they're in no man's land, right? And where do they go for help? Where do they search out resources? And I think that, you know, the labels that we use in many times are actually incredibly detrimental, also because what we're doing is we're labeling the person as the problem rather than looking at the environment as the problem. You know, and I think so much of the work of changing habits, of understanding how to manage your urges, manage your emotions, it's all things that we've just never been taught how to do, right? Our environment didn't give us this information. And so we don't have to label ourselves as a problem, which of course creates more shame. We can actually start to look at, hey, what's the information that I need to know in order to change this habit?
This kind of stuff should really be taught in school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have a coach that says, you know, why do we learn trigonometry, right? Like, why doesn't someone explain that our thoughts create our feelings and our feelings drive our actions, right? Because that is such transformational information. So many of us think like, why did I do that? Why am I behaving this way? Why did I have another drink, right? And just because we don't understand what motivates our actions, and it feels like they just come out of the blue, and having that knowledge really gives you the framework for understanding how you can start to change what's not working in your life.
Well, knowledge is always power, isn't it? The third point you made was, for most people, drinking too much is just a habit that they unknowingly or unconsciously taught themselves, and they need to figure out how to undo the habit. So drinking diverts your attention away from the problem as well.
You know, that's why I always talk about, you know, yes, when I'm talking on my podcast or working with clients, yes, I'm talking about drinking, I'm talking about alcohol, but we're actually really usually talking about something much deeper, right? And that is, why are we turning to it? Why are we making that choice? What does it feel like when we don't have that drink at the end of the day? You really want to get at the root cause. You really want to understand, because there is something deeper there, right? There's something deeper motivating, and it usually is a negative emotion. And if you can start to understand that, then you're in such a more empowered place to change, because it becomes something that's so much bigger than just saying yes or no to a drink, right? And just using willpower. I mean, we actually all want to feel better. That's why many of us are turning to a drink in the first place. And this shows you a more sustainable way to feel better.
Absolutely. And the final point was, it is possible to lose your desire to drink.
This one, I will tell you, was so crazy to me. And I always say to my podcast listeners, listen, I get it. If you think this sounds crazy when I say that I changed my desire, I went from loving alcohol to being like, not interested. If that sounds crazy, I get it, right? Because we aren't kind of given this information that our desire is actually something that can change and shift. And it's funny because, of course we watch it happen in relationships, right? We think back to that, guy that we dated in our early 20s, and we're just like, I remember, I see my diary entries that I was so in love with him, right? But there's nothing, right? It's hard to even go back to that memory. And so for most of us, when we see desire shift in our life, it's this really kind of mysterious thing. But when you understand alcohol is neutral, when you understand how your thinking creates your desire, when you start to understand the role of your thoughts, you see that you can shift it, right? People often come to me and they just say, I love alcohol. I love the taste. It's my best friend. You're having all these thoughts about it. Of course, you're going to have a lot of desire. So if you can start to see how your thinking is generating desire, all of a sudden you have a pathway to start to change your desire. And that, to me, is the most magical part of it, because then you don't have to be living a life where you're always missing out, always feeling deprived, always feeling like, oh, I really wish I could, but I can't, right? Then you get to a place of real freedom.
It's amazing. And I mean, it would be great if we just had this switch that we could switch our brains on and off. If it would be that easy, it would have already have been done. But you give so much really great information on how it is possible. It is about our thinking. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out today. And I know that this is going to get really great reaction, because I don't want people to feel shame over things. It's obviously something that we need to look inside ourselves and find out what's going on and teach ourselves new coping skills. So that gives everyone hope. So I urge anyone watching this to go onto Rachel's website. It's Rachel Hart, RachelHart.com. Check out her podcast. Highly recommend that you purchase her book. It's on, is it in paper copy yet, Rachel? Or?
It is. It came out in paper copy January 1st.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So you can look that up, and the name of the book again is Why Can't I Drink Like Everybody Else? A step-by-step guide to understanding why you drink and how to take a break. Thank you so, so much for joining me today, and hopefully I might be able to meet you face-to-face one day.
I'd love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.